project of Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and in Canada, it's coordinated by Bird Studies Canada. So why should we care about birds? Well, birds can be used as bioindicators to assess our ecosystem. They're pretty ubiquitous, found all over the place in all habitats. Anywhere you go, you can see birds. And it's that's really noticed by the general public. There's a lot of people out there of all levels of knowledge that are bird watchers. So there's a lot of people out collecting information every day on birds already. So the question that we have as bird conservationists is, how do we keep the common birds common? Well, one of the most important things we can do is have good information about their distribution and their abundance patterns. So we need good information. Now, a lot of you might be familiar with other citizen science projects that tap into the huge network of bird watchers out there. Things like the Christmas bird count, the breeding bird survey. Those are just a couple examples of large-scale citizen science projects that use a real army of citizen scientists to monitor long-term trends in bird populations in the case of the Christmas bird count and breeding bird survey, basically on a continental scale. So what is eBird compared to some of those other citizen science projects? Well, eBird is made up, it's sort of got three main spheres that it looks into. The first is it's a gathering tool. So it's a checklist-based program that you use the internet to submit checklists of the birds you saw, where you were, when you were there, and what you saw. So it's a gathering tool. It's also an archive. So all the information that is submitted into eBird is archived for use now, but just as importantly into the future. So we have data to compare future trends to. And I think one of the most important aspects of eBird is that it's a data dissemination tool. So I'll go through some of the data visualizations that you can do with eBird, and I hope by the end of today you'll agree that it's a pretty powerful data delivery tool. And then as well, with the dissemination side, the data is being distributed through the Avian Knowledge Network for bird researchers, government agencies, anybody who's interested in bird data can access that and use it hopefully for the conservation of birds. So how is eBird different than some of those other citizen science projects that you've already heard of, like Christmas bird counts or Project Feeder Watch or breeding bird survey? First of all, it's global in scale. You can enter bird data from anywhere you go in the world. That's a huge difference compared to those other projects. And because it's global, it encompasses all species. So you can enter, wherever you go, you can enter any species you encounter. It's also a year-round project. It's not over just the 2-week period around Christmas or during the winter or during the breeding season. It's all year. And what makes eBird data really special is that all the data is tied to precise geographic location. So I like to tell people, and when I do this presentation to other groups, basically that's the fancy way of saying eBird uses Google Maps. And then the other big difference from some of those projects is that there's a very, very broad user base. So it's people that just watch birds out their window, and it's hardcore birders that, as soon as they hear about a bird down the street, they run out and go look for it. So really, eBird is putting bird watching, creating a purpose for your everyday bird watching. So a brief history of eBird. It was started in 2002 by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. The initial uptake of eBird by bird watchers was quite poor. In 2006, Bird Studies Canada partnered with Cornell to launch the eBird Canada portal. And so there's different regional portals. So if you're in Canada and you want to see Canadian-specific bird-related news, you can go to the eBird Canada portal. And there's a couple other perks of going to the local portal. It selects your country automatically for you, things like that. So eBird Canada is one of several different portals. And then after 2006, there was a real shift in how eBird kind of tried to market itself. As I said, the initial uptake was pretty low, partly because it wasn't very good at what it did. But there also was no real incentive for people to take the time to input their data. So starting in about 2008, 2007, there was a series of service-oriented improvements that were incentives to get people to use eBird. I'll talk about those shortly. So some recent milestones. It went global in 2010. Before that, it was strictly a North American and Australia, New Zealand kind of thing. By March 2011, so in less than a year after going global, 90% of all bird species had been reported, and same with countries. There had been checklists submitted for 90% of countries. You can see this is a distribution map of house sparrow records, which is native to Europe and Asia, but it's been introduced in lots of places. So it's pretty ubiquitous all around the world wherever there's people. So you can see from this map kind of a general idea of where eBird checklists have been submitted. In May of 2011, the milestone of 3 million observations submitted in a single month was surpassed. And just last August, the 100 millionth observation was submitted to eBird. Currently, eBird gets about close to 3 million a month now is pretty normal, bird observations. In Ontario, that number is about 100,000, 150,000 bird observations in a month. So this is a tool that was launched just last month. It's the eBird Live Submission Map. So I just took a screenshot of this last night, actually. So all the gray dots are places, as of about supper time last night, are places that somebody had submitted a checklist for yesterday. So that's just in a average middle of the week day where there's a checklist submitted. If you are really bored, you can go to watch the eBird Live Submission Map and see them coming in. It's kind of cool for a couple minutes, but the yellow there, that's what it looks like when a submission is entered. So in a given day, there's about, usually on a weekday, somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 checklists. So a checklist, could contain one species or it could contain 200 species. I think the average eBird-wide is about 10 species per checklist. So we're talking on a weekday somewhere around 100,000 observations a day. It's higher on weekends, obviously. You'll see a big bump if you watch on weekends. And on the recent Great Backyard Bird Count, which is another project run through Cornell, it happened over the February long weekend. This year, Great Backyard Bird Count was integrated with eBird, so all the submissions that came in for Great Backyard Bird Count went in through eBird. I think on the last day, there was something like 60,000 checklists. So that just shows you there's a huge user base still that isn't using eBird. We just scratched the surface. So in Ontario, this is a slightly dated figure, but the trend is what you'd expect. There's eBird submissions mostly around the populated south of Ontario. I like to point out Waterloo region here is one of the highest eBird submissions. That's because the Kitchener-Waterloo Field Naturalist Club has a bird records database that they uploaded to eBird. Same thing in Toronto. There's a local bird club, the Toronto Ornithological Club, that submitted a whole bunch of records that they've been keeping over the years. And same thing with Northumberland County. So you can see clubs are starting to come on board with using it as a good outlet for a good place to archive all their records they've been collecting. But there's still a lot of room for growth. So here's the Ontario eBird checklist submissions per year. So you can see, you know, before 2006, it was really not very widely used. That's when, in 2006, is when the eBird Canada portal was launched. So that was the first real advertising kind of thing that Bird Studies Canada started to push it a little. And then, you know, 2007, 2008, 2009, there was that's when we started seeing some of the incentives pop into eBird. And in the last couple of years, it's just the growth has just been amazing, and we're still definitely not tapped out for Ontario at all. But so you can see last year we had almost 100,000 checklists submitted through the year. So so at 10 species of checklist, that's about 1 million observations submitted in Ontario last year, and we're on pace already. I think February was our busiest eBird month yet, so we're already on pace to well surpass last year's. So you're probably thinking, that's pretty impressive growth, so those incentives must be really good. And they are. I'm going to show you some of those incentives, and then I'm going to give you a demo of how to submit data into eBird. So I'm going to switch out of the PowerPoint, and I'm going to go live to the computer. So are there any questions before I get into the demo? On the phone? All right. So eBird, you go to eBird. It's an internet-based program, as I said. So all you have to do is type in www.ebird.ca, and it will take you to the eBird Canada homepage. So there's some Canada-specific news recognizing some of the top contributors in Canada. There's a link to each province and territory, and it'll tell you how many checklists all-time those places have submitted. So you can see Ontario, we're almost at 250,000 checklists all-time, and about almost 100 of those were submitted last year alone. So it's still really growing quickly. So some of the incentives. So I'm logged in. You have to register with an email address, but that's all the information you need to provide. If you don't want to provide your name, you can leave that blank. Most people have no problem with sharing their name. They like to get a little bit of glory that goes along with submitting. Okay, so I'm going to go to the My eBird tab. All right, so this is the My eBird dashboard, as I like to call it. And so the thing a lot of bird watchers really like is it tells you exactly how many species you've seen in your life. It gives you all sorts of other stats, tell you how many species you've seen in your life, your year, this month, checklists, all sorts of other stats. You can get life lists for different areas. So here we're on the county tab, so it lists all my different counties, most of them in Ontario, telling me how many I've seen in my life, how many in the year, month. You can do the same for states and provinces, for countries, and what eBird calls major regions. So pretty straightforward, but it does all that for you. A lot of bird watchers are really concerned with making sure they know exactly how many species they've seen. So it does more than that, though, certainly. That's pretty basic. I'm going to show you what happens if you click your life list number. I could have done that for any of these, for the month list or a county life list, but I'm going to just show you my life list. There we go. So right away, it brings up my life list. The default is to sort it taxonomically, and it'll tell you the date you first saw it, where you first saw it. You could sort it alphabetically, or you could sort it by date. I'm going to sort it by date to bring up when I saw my most recent new birds for my life list. So I'm going to go down to the bottom, and you could click on any of these species to bring up details. So I'm going to click on Hispaniolan lizard cuckoo. There it is. So I've seen Hispaniolan lizard cuckoo exactly 3 times. If I wanted to click on a location, I could click on a location to see what my life list was for that location, or I could click on a date to bring up that particular checklist. So as an example, I'll bring up this checklist And eBird allows you to embed links to photos. So here's my checklist from that day. I saw a, I think that was Hispaniola and slider or something. So here's some embedded photos that I put in. You don't have to do that, but it's kind of a neat way to keep memories from a memorable birding day or something. You can put in links to YouTube videos as well, but because we're on a Ontario government computer, we can't see them. So anyways, you can see those. I'm going to go back. And so it's kind of neat for a species you haven't seen very often, but I think it's even more interesting to do that for something more common. Any suggestions for a bird? Something kind of common? Mallard. Mallard? All right, so I'm going to sort it taxonomically because I don't know when my first mallard was. And here we go. So I'm going to click mallard. One I have in my records was 1998. So it should bring up a list here. It's a lot of mallards to think about. Says it's still thinking. Oh, there we go. Okay, so it's sorted automatically by date. So I can go down, and if I was curious to know how many mallards I've reported mallard 1,582 times. Now I could. There's no way right now to sort by number, but you can easily go through and see when you've seen them. You could sort by location, etc. Okay, so those are the life lists. That's a really nice tool for bird watchers to be able to keep track. It's really nice for looking at a certain location life list as well. Like if you have your yard and you want to see when was the last time I saw a pine grosbeak on my yard, you could go and bring up your list for your yard. Another feature that a lot of bird watchers really like, and it gets a little competitive here in Peterborough with eBird, is the alert system. So the alerts you can subscribe to if you want, and they send out an email alert if something triggers it. So for an example, here are the alerts that I'm subscribed to. So I have, if anybody reports a bird I've never seen in Waterloo region, Norfolk County, or anywhere in Ontario that I've never seen, I get an email sent to me with the details. That's pretty important for a bird watcher. I'm also interested in knowing about any rare birds that are reported in Peterborough or Waterloo. So I get those emails with the alerts. If you can view those alerts on the web instead of getting them by email. So here's the rare bird alert for Ontario right now. So the default is, again, taxonomic, but I've already clicked the date to sort by date. So some recent rare sightings around Ontario. And this is really nice because if somebody embeds a photo, you can see the photo. So there's boreal owl in Ottawa. So the alerts are really handy for something a lot of people really like. But what really drives people with eBird is another feature called the Top 100. So we're under the Explore tab. The Top 100 will show you your ranking in relation to everybody else on eBird for whatever you want. If you want to see how you're doing in Canada or a specific state or province, or I'll show you Peterborough County here. So we selected Ontario, and we're gonna select counties. We'll go down to Peterborough. So for those of you who aren't on eBird yet in the building, if you ever see somebody from NHIC or Species at Risk branch running out the front door, it's because of this. So here's this year's top 100. So you can see Chris Risley. He's right here in the front. He's number 1 right now, but he's just waiting for Don to unseat him. So it's pretty competitive, and it's a really smart feature that eBird introduced, because this is what drives people to submit their sightings. This is a big thing for a lot of people, not for everybody, but so it's the top 100 right now. It's showing just for this year, and it's sorted by species. You can sort by checklists as well. See how you're doing compared to other people with number of checklists. So if you don't think you can compete for species, maybe you can just submit the most checklists. That's what I try to do. So you can look at it for the year. You could go back in time and see any other year. So in Peterborough, we could go back to 1964. There's data in eBird from 1964. We could look at it all time, see how you fit all time. Change the year. And we could, if we decided, oh, you know what, I'm interested in seeing all of Ontario, you could hit that change region button, go back to just the entire country or state/province. We got Ontario selected, bring that up, and we can see, okay, 155 species, I'm only at 91. I got some catching up to do. So that's a tool that really gets a lot of people fired up with eBird for sure. So you can also, from this screen, you can directly link to another output feature. You could click on the number of species that have been reported, and that will bring up a list of arrivals. So if you're curious as to know when a species was first seen in the province this year, you've got it right here. So this is sorted automatically by date. We're in arrivals for this year only, 2013 to 2013. So you can see a lot of species were reported on January 1st, because there's a lot of people out birding every day, and a fair number of them are putting their records into eBird. So just on January 1st, there was 146 species reported in Ontario. Now more recently, so there was an early osprey reported in Kingston on February 25th. Ross's goose, indigo bunting at a feeder. So that's really fun. It's really interesting, I find, to look at those arrivals from year to year. So I'm going to go back to Peterborough. Peterborough, continue. And I'm going to go, I want to see what last year was like. So what was seen around this time last year? So last year on March 7th, nothing really new, but on the 8th we had some ducks coming back. We had, when was the first killdeer? First killdeer was on the 12th, right there. So last year, right around this time is when a lot of birds started coming back, and I'm sure on the weekend it looks like we're going to get some nice weather to maybe bring in some new arrivals. Yep, the map feature for sure. All right, yep, that was where I was going. So that's the arrivals. You could do the same for the last record of the year with departures, or if you're interested in high counts, you want to know what's a really high count. What's the all-time high count for Peterborough County for black-capped chickadee or cedar waxing? You could do high counts. You can change the year frame you're looking at. So those are some of the output tools. We'll go check out. I'm going to do bar charts and then the maps. So if you do explore, sort of the meat and potatoes of eBird output are the bar charts. So I'll create a bar chart. Now when you're creating a bar chart, that's basically a seasonal checklist of birds for a given area. So you could bring up you could make it for all of Ontario by clicking entire region. You could do a county. You could do a hotspot. Hotspots in eBird are basically public locations like parks or places that lots of people regularly regularly go bird watching at. Bird conservation regions. So North America is divided up into bird conservation regions. Or I think one of the neatest options is to use the important bird areas in Ontario. So I'm gonna go to important bird areas. I'm gonna create a bar chart for an important bird area. So you could also create a bar chart from one of your personal locations. So I could go and create a bar chart for my backyard if I wanted. I'm gonna stick with important bird areas though. And then you can select from the list. So you could click, if you wanted to see a combined bar chart for 2 locations, you could hold Control and click a couple of them. But in this case, I want to create a bar chart for Presqu'ile. Presqu'ile Provincial Park is an important bird area. So here we go. Here's the bar chart. This is, what it does is it looks at all the checklists that are submitted within the important bird area, and it aggregates them all together. It calculates what's the frequency of checklists that reported that species for that week. So in the case of snow goose, the second week of January, it looks like there's probably 1 record or just a couple records. But then, you know, late March, there's a few more, and through April, you might see them. Brant, as an example, they become fairly high percentage of checklists towards the end of May. Canada goose, they're around pretty much all year. So it's pretty intuitive how to interpret it. You can change the date. If you're just interested for a particular year, you could change the date. But if you're interested in a certain species, you can go have a look. Maybe we want to see canvasback. So click on the species, and that's going to translate the bar chart into a frequency graph. So this is the same information that's presented in the bar chart. It's just showing the actual frequency. So you can see the highest frequency of canvasback is about 40% of all checklists within Presqu'ile from basically March, the first week of March, right through to the 3rd week of March. You have about a 40% chance of seeing a canvasback is what it's telling you. Now, if you wanted to see where in Presqu'ile are the best places or where they've been reported, you could click the map icon, and this will take you to the eBird maps. So locations in eBirds are points, and the ones with the flames on them, those are the hot spots. So it might be, this is a general one for Presqu'ile, and there's one for the lighthouse at Presqu'ile. The orange ones are recent sightings, so in the past 30 days, and blue are only historic sightings. So you could zoom in on one of those and click it, and it will bring up a list of the sightings. So for the general look, just if you didn't want to specify exactly where, you just specified Presqu'ile Provincial Park, and you submitted it, this is what you'd be submitting to. So you can see there's, you know, lots and lots of reports from different people. So most recently, on February 26th, Doug McRae reported 40 canvasbacks at Presqu'ile. If we wanted to see what else Doug saw, we could click the checklist link, and this takes you to a link of the checklist. So you can see, oh, he also had 500 mute swans. All right, so I have a pretty good shot at seeing them probably. When he had 1 lesser scaup and 750 greater scops, so maybe not a very good shot at seeing a lesser scaup. So that sort of information from the from that. Get out of there. All right, so that was one way to get to the maps. The other way is if you hit the Explore tab and then the range and point maps. This is what it takes you to by default. So we'll hide this. Now, are there any species that anybody's interested in seeing a map of? Groove-billed Annie. Good species. So you start typing in the name in the species box. We'll select Groove-billed Annie. So here's the range map. You can it's broken into blocks when you're zoomed out like this, and the frequency legend is on the sidebar here. So the highest frequency reports are from basically all through Central America, west coast of South America, north coast of South America. Now you can see there's all these real light purple dots in North America. So if you're interested in exploring some of those, you can zoom in. So you can zoom in. If you've got a wheeled mouse, you can just turn the wheel. You can click the magnifying glass and then select an area. So I want to go in and look at Southern Ontario. And so it's still just showing me squares. If I wanted to switch to those points, you can click the Show Point Sooner box. And that will, as long as there's fewer than 2,000 points on the screen at that point, it'll switch to the points. So in this case, where you don't have to worry, because there's not very many records. So if we wanted to click a record, we could click it. We see October 10th to 12th, in 1988, there was one at the Brights Grove Sewage Lagoons. Kind of interesting. All right, I'm going to show you a map for killdeer now. This is a use of the eBird maps that I like to do. And it's loading. So if you're interested, you know, I'm getting excited about spring migration starting, and I'm curious to know how far killdeers have made it into the northeast so far. So this is showing all years. I know they're pretty widespread, so I'm going to switch to this year, current year. If you were interested in just a certain month range or the past 10 years or a certain date range, you could set those. We're just going to switch to this year only. There we go. So there's been a few, you know, in the extreme south of Ontario. We'll zoom in. So there's been a couple, none up as far as Peterborough and none north of that yet. But, you know, let's see the dates. March 1st. Oh, that one maybe spent the winter there. It was there in January. But so you can get an idea. If you check this again in a few days, that sort of front of arriving killdeers will probably have shifted north several hundred kilometers. So kind of a neat way to keep tabs on things like migration. So the data exploration side is pretty powerful. I think next to a field guide, it's one of the most valuable tools a bird watcher can have to learn about birds and what species to expect. Now, of interest to a lot of people is another option in the Explore Data tab, is the download data option. So you can, on your My eBird tab, you can download your own data whenever you want in a spreadsheet, which a lot of people really like because they like to do all sorts of crazy stats on when they saw what, that sort of thing. But if you're doing a project, you're doing a research project or some sort of conservation-based project, you can request a large chunk of the eBird data for your purposes. So you go into download data. You have to first submit an explanation to eBird as to what you plan on using the data for. It's mainly a way for them to keep tabs on who's using the data for what. And then once you have permission, you can customize what you want and then submit the request. And then once it's approved, then you get a data download. So that's a really handy tool for anybody who's doing any sort of work with conservation or research on birds. Okay, so that's just sort of scraping the surface on some of the output tools of eBird. Obviously, we don't have time to go through everything. I'm going to now switch into how to submit data, and you'll see it's very, very simple. Before I do that, are there any questions about some of the Explore data options? Okay. So we're on the eBird page still. You have to log in. I'm going to hit Submit Observations. And so there's 3 simple steps for submitting your data. The first step is to tell eBird where you went. So there's several options on how to do that. The first option is to select it from a list of the locations you've previously been. So once you've submitted a location, some data for one location, it'll show up in this list, and you can just click it and choose it that way. If it's your first time or you went to a new place, then you need to tell it exactly where you were. So the easiest option is using the map. That's the option we're going to use today, but I'm going to skip that and explain the other ones real quick. So if you know the coordinates of the location you're at, you can just input those coordinates using this option, the use latitude longitude option. And then if you maybe don't have really exact information about where you were, you can just select a whole city or a county within Ontario, or you could submit even a checklist for just Ontario. Now, obviously, that information is much less valuable than providing data for a specific location, but eBird recognizes that not everybody will always have all that information available. And this last option, import data, if you have your information in a spreadsheet, eBird has a template that you can use to real quickly and easily upload the data, and if anybody's interested in that, I'm happy to help them with formatting their data. Okay, so I'm going to click Find It on a Map, though. So before you go to the map, they want you to specify where you were in general terms so that it can zoom in a bit. So I'm just going to go and type Ontario. We've got Canada selected already. If we wanted to be more specific, I could type in the county, but I'm not going to be. So it's going to take me to a map of Ontario. So, like I already said, the orange spots with the flame are birding hotspots, which are just public birding locations. And then the blue ones here are your personal locations. So that might be, my yard or just some road I drove down and wanted to submit information for, but, there's not really much chance of somebody else wanting to use those same locations. So I'm going to zoom in. All of these are showing up as those plus signs because it represents several different locations. So we've got to zoom in first. So I'm going to zoom into Peterborough. Zoom in a little bit more. So I'm using the wheel on my mouse to zoom in. So this morning on my way to work, I drove along the edge of Little Lake real briefly. This is Little Lake in downtown Peterborough. So there's already a location for where I was, but if I wanted to create a new location, it would just be a simple matter of zooming in to wherever I wanted and then clicking the mouse. It puts a point down, and I would have to give it a name. And if I wanted to suggest it as a hotspot, I would just check that box. In this case, there's a hotspot already for Little Lake. So I click the icon, brought up the name. I can confirm that's the location I want. So there we go. I'm done selecting the location. And just by doing that, it stores the coordinates of where you were. So that data has an extra really valuable piece of information tied to it. Second step, pretty straightforward also. You have to select the date. So it's March 7th. That's today. And then you have to tell it what you were doing. So there's buttons to click to get more information, what kind of count you were doing. Were you traveling, or were you standing in one spot? Were you just casually out and you noticed a couple things? And then there's a couple other options. Not going to get into those today. I was driving, so I'm going to count it as a traveling count. I got my notebook here. I was there at 8:10 a.m., and I was there for 15 minutes. And I traveled about 2 kilometers. So depending on the option you choose here, it will require more or less information. So because I said traveling, it wants to know what time I started, how long I was there, how far did I go, and how many people were there. It was just me. You can enter any comments, weather comments if you want, or anything you want. Those always stay private, so if you view somebody else's checklist, you can't see those checklist comments. So that's really important. If you have any information that you want to be kept private, you put it in there. All right, so that's that step. And now the fun part is to tell eBird what it was you saw. So I have there's all sorts of options here for how you want your checklist displayed. I prefer to see subspecies options, but some people don't like that, so you can remove that option if you don't want it. I have it also grouped by most likely, which is really handy for a place like Little Lake that has lots of people going to it. It automatically groups it into groups of frequent species or infrequent species, and then species that haven't been reported. So it's basing that on 31 checklists over the 2 weeks before and after this date, all time. It looks at the frequencies. So most of the checklists, over 10% of them, within the month that's happening right now, basically, these species are usually reported. These species, not so much. So most of the species are usually on those lists. So you can start entering your numbers. You know, there was 5 Canada geese. There was 85 mallards. And anyways, you get the idea. So once you enter some numbers, if you want to put some extra information, you can. The add details box, you can type in comments. You could type in, there was 2 males. You can also enter that information under age, sex, so you could say there's 2 adult males. If it was the breeding season, you could enter a breeding code that you observed, so maybe you had carrying food or something like that. So you can enter all that information. Now the other part here is, if it's really handy because if you enter a mistake, say I entered 1,000 goldeneye, you know, easy to slip on the zeros, and you try to go ahead, it'll say, oh, are you sure? 1,000 is a high count based on the underlying filter that's there for Peterborough County. So I'd say, no, I didn't actually mean to do 1,000. There was only 10. So, okay, so I'm okay then, because I corrected that. Now, if there really was 1,000, and you submitted it, that report would get flagged for review by a volunteer reviewer. So in most of the counties in Ontario, there's 1 or 2 reviewers that go through that data, and you know, they might contact you for more information, but it's a way to make sure that, you know, there isn't crazy stuff in there. You know, nobody's reporting hundreds of Barrow's goldeneye and things like that. Yeah.
There's the word that says add data for, and what's the add besides code?
Oh, this is oiled birds. So this was from the Gulf oil spill a couple of years ago. eBird added in these codes so you could report if you saw some oiled birds, and then that was a way for some of the people working on the Gulf oil spill to track where there was oiled birds being seen. So it can be adapted for different monitoring schemes like that. So anyways, in the interest of time, I'm going to just submit this checklist. There is a data quality process in place that I think works pretty well, and I think most people agree that the eBird data is pretty high quality compared to what it could be, for sure. So the last thing you have to do before you hit submit is you have to answer the question, are you submitting a complete checklist? This is just a way to say, if you say yes to this, you're basically saying that all the species you didn't report, they weren't there, or you didn't detect them. So if those go in as zeros then. If you hit no, then you're not necessarily saying there were no black ducks. You're just saying you didn't count the black ducks. There could have been some, you just didn't report them. So that's really important for the frequency charts. So when it calculates black duck frequency for that week, it won't use this checklist to make that calculation because they don't know, maybe there was some, maybe there wasn't any. So I'm going to hit no because this isn't a complete checklist. There's a few other species I saw. So there we go. That's a submitted checklist. Now another feature along here is you can share it. Checklist sharing is basically adding another observer. So if I was out with a couple colleagues and they also have eBird accounts, I can add them to the checklist, and then all this data goes into their checklist, so it counts for their statistics as well. Pretty important for birders. Okay. All right, so that's the quick eBird demo. There's a lot more going on for sure. So I'm going to go back, though. Are there any questions about the data submission? Yeah.
So I assume from the tab device then that you can go in after the fact and update your list?
Oh, yeah.
Have more specific location information after the fact?
Yeah, you can. So the question for those of you on the phone was, can you go in and edit it in the future? And absolutely. So if I went to my eBird and hit Manage My Observations, it's going to tell me, here's a list of all the checklists I've submitted. You know, I could go down and view it, and I might want to change, you know, I might want to take a species off or add something. So you can go in at any time and modify it. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to wrap it up then. All right, so that was the quick and dirty eBird demo, and I'm definitely more than happy to help anybody with questions about how to use eBird afterwards. But I just want to quick go through a couple more things. So a lot of people often ask about eBird and mobile apps. There's an app for submitting records to eBird for iPhone and Android devices. Unfortunately, I have a BlackBerry, as a lot of you probably do, and there's no eBird app for BlackBerry. But you can just go to use your browser and submit checklists from your phone that way. And there's a bunch of other apps that allow you to access the eBird database for, you know, if you're out bird finding or something like that. So what happens to all of the data that gets submitted to eBird? I mentioned earlier it gets incorporated into something called the Avian Knowledge Network. And the Avian Knowledge Network, it takes data from eBird and other Bird Studies Canada projects and a couple other bird observatories in the States, Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory and Point Reyes Bird Observatory, and it combines it with all sorts of other ecological data, and it's available for government agencies, for conservation organizations. Anybody who has a reason to need that data can access it through the Avian Knowledge Network. So what has eBird already taught us? And I say in brackets, besides how to keep better records, I know, speaking from experience, I have much, much better field notes now because of the incentives eBird provides. But there's a lot of other things it's taught us too. So I was out on a trip a couple years ago with my dad and my brother to Southern California. We used eBird pretty much every day before we went out the next day looking for things. And, these mountain plovers, we were able to get them in a field using eBird. I went to Costa Rica a couple years ago, and I was able to pull up a bar chart for the exact hotel that I was going to go to. So before I went, I had a pretty good idea. You know, I'll probably see rufous-tailed hummingbirds. Sure enough, I did. And I'll probably see blue-crowned motmots. I did. So it's a pretty neat way to explore what's around in different places of the world. I've shown you a few range maps. Here's the range map of cerulean warbler. So this is, you know, this is just collected by volunteers. This is pretty impressive that, you know, in a few years, that's a pretty accurate range map of both migration, wintering range, and breeding range of a bird species. That's just pieced together with volunteers. And this is an example. This is cerulean warbler again. My in-laws, I'm lucky enough to have in-laws that have a cottage on Charleston Lake where there's, they usually have a pair of cerulean warblers right out by their cottage. And so one summer I was living there, and I kept track of what I was seeing every day. And I noticed a really interesting observation after the fact. You know, from about mid-May to mid to late June, I was getting cerulean warblers singing basically every day, you know, 80 to 100% of the time. And then song by late June and into July, it really dropped off. I was only getting them about 50% of the time. And, you know, by late July, they were probably still there, but they stopped singing. And for any of you who know about cerulean warblers, you'll know if they're not singing, they're pretty impossible to know they're there. So that's just an example of one person's data And when you combine it with, you know, millions and millions of other observations, it's pretty powerful stuff. This is my favorite example of looking at eBird to see a short-term trend over a huge area. And this was the white-winged crossbill eruption in 2008 and 2009. So I'm just going to show you the eBird range map. So here's the map from basically the winter period of the year after the eruption, 2009 to 2010. And you can see there's absolutely 0 observations of white-winged crossbill in Ontario, in southern Ontario. Now contrast that with the eruption the previous year. It's a big difference, but you know, that sort of information we can track with things like Christmas bird count already, but it doesn't provide, Christmas bird counts and other projects don't provide the ongoing monitoring that eBird does. So as an example, we can look at it month by month. So in September, there were a few white-winged crossbills around. Next month, a few more going south a bit. By November, they were getting more and more widespread in the northeast. December, they were quite widespread. January, they were everywhere. February, they started thinning out. Same with March, April, and by May, they were pretty much gone. So that's just you get a time-lapse view of where they were. And if we zoomed out on the map, you'd see they went to basically a different part of North America. The white-winged crossbills are famous for, you know, traveling across the continent looking for big cone crops. So eBird data has been used, figured prominently in U.S. State of the Birds reports, especially looking at the importance of private lands for birds. So in a lot of, in the States, and I expect it's similar in Canada, we have good information about some of our public lands, but we don't have a good handle on how important private lands are, especially in places like the States where a lot of land is private. But eBird data allows us to peer into those places. So it's been used in reports like this, and it's been utilized for at least 40 peer-reviewed papers. This was a paper published last spring. This is just a figure of it, looking at spring arrival dates, and this is on a continental scale, looking at spring arrival dates of some common species in relation to spring temperature anomalies. So we're now able to look at these sorts of questions on a continental or even a global scale using eBird. So as a closer to home example, we're using eBird data to inform where species at risk are found. It's a lot of information that we can gather using eBird. And it's a really easy and quick way to see trends in birds as they're happening. So this was a cave swallow, big movement of cave swallows into southern Ontario in last fall. So this is the sort of information we'd get in a publication maybe a year later after the fact, but with eBird you can track these sorts of events as they're happening, basically. This is my favorite. This is the animated occurrence maps that eBird's created. So blackpoll, this is the animated occurrence map for blackpoll warbler, and this is using some modeling based on habitat use and the eBird data. And so you can get an idea of the continental scale of their migration. So in the spring, they go up through sort of the whole eastern U.S., disappear into the boreal forest of Canada, and then in the fall, they take off from the east coast. They don't really occur in Florida. They go out over the Atlantic and hit Brazil on their fall migration. So what are you all waiting for? Time to go out and collect some data and submit it to eBird. So that's the address to get to eBird. I hope a lot of you check it out. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.